So welcome to this week's episode of the Lovefly Podcast. And today we have two guests. We have a family of humans on the podcast. So this is going to be, we've done this before. We've had a mother and daughter cabin crew combo that worked for a large British airline. I think they did name them British Airways. And I don't think we've ever had anybody else. So yeah, this is a good thing. So we'll see. So tell us about yourself, folks. Introduce yourselves. Tell us a little bit about your story, and let's see where this goes.
Excellent. Well, shall I go first, Dan?
You go first, Roy.
Yeah. So my name's Roy Diggory. I obviously grown up as a pilot's son, so that's my sort of angle on this. And I am someone who, for a large chunk of my life, had a extreme fear of flying. So I found it very, very difficult to fly. But I guess one of the unique things about my background, other than being a pilot's son, is actually there was two other Roys in my family who actually passed away in a plane crash, which is very, very unusual.
Great start to a podcast. Thank you so much for coming. Yeah, brilliant.
Should we start again?
No, that's good. Yeah, I knew that, but yes.
Yeah. So yeah, I grew up as a child. I always wanted to be a pilot. Loved flying. I wanted to follow my father's footsteps. Then two things that happened really. One, I was colorblind, so I couldn't. So I ended up, like many people, I had to follow a more normal career path. And similarly to you, Paul, went into the field of personal development and all that sort of area, psychology. And the second thing was when I was about 19, I actually developed a fear of flying. So throughout my childhood, I was absolutely fine, but as I understand it quite commonly happens as I got older, I developed a fear of flying. So here today to talk about that journey from my perspective and sort of overcoming a fear that feels like it's rooted in your family history. So it's actually like, oh God, people who have had my name, get into trouble on planes. Like, is that going to happen to me? So talking about that journey and obviously how I overcame that fear over time and sort of worked with my father to do that.
Interesting. Okay, so some good little moments there already. Some people might have already turned off. No, hopefully not. Stay with it, folks. It'll get good. I promise.
So I'm John. I'm Roy's father, and I'm now retired, but I flew as a pilot for 45 years, the last 30 years of which was for a large British airline. And I was the one who chose to call my son Roy. Lots of people asked, how on earth could you do it with the family history of the two Roys? And the second Roy, my cousin, was very influential in me becoming a pilot. I liked the name, and I was sort of third time lucky. And so far, that's been the case. Typical logical pilot. Don't worry about emotions. It'll work. He'll be fine.
Yeah, exactly.
So the last 30 years, I spent flying long haul, medium haul, and short haul. When Roy was younger, he'd come away on trips with me. We go on family holidays. And to be honest, I never realized he had a fear of flying until a long time after it had actually become apparent to Roy. And then I suppose about 15 years ago, he started asking me questions on why does this happen? What's that? The sort of questions we as pilots get asked an awful lot. And I answered those, trying to put some rational input to try and quell his irrational fears. And then the idea of the book came about. So, well, if it's working for Roy, perhaps it'll work for other people. Yeah. And it would be a fun thing for a father and son to do. So I was originally hoping that one day Roy would fly with me as my co-pilot. We ended up as co-authors instead.
Oh, well, that's something, isn't it? So just do a quick name check for the book so that people like to follow up on things like that. So plug that now. And if you've got a copy of it, you can show it because some people watch this on YouTube. There we go. Feel the fear, fly anyway.
Yeah. So a unique father and son guide. You can get it on any of the major channels, Amazon, and so on. And also we have a website called fearofflying.com. We've recorded, like you, Paul, a few podcasts together, us discussing some of our lessons learned about the journey we've gone together. So You can look up any of those podcasts, the book, after if you're interested.
Okay, that's great. So there's quite a lot to dig into here, isn't there? And so, a couple of sort of things coming off for me. So there's this sort of situation of like, father's a pilot, and then you've developed a fear of flying. That's an interesting dynamic, and it's not the first time I've heard that. Also, partners of pilots as well, I've come across. The other one is the two Roys. We've got to ask about that, what that's about, and then kind of how it was helping somebody who's related to overcome the fear of heights. So, for instance, in my world as a coach, I find that my stuff doesn't really work with people I know, and if I try and help somebody who, like, I've got relatives that don't fly. I mean, quite a lot of my family don't fly, and yet nothing I can say to them will change that. And they just go, "Oh yeah, it's what you." Yeah. So I think that's quite interesting as well. So yeah. So what do you want to go with first? What do you think would be interesting? I've got a feeling we need to get the two Roys out of the way, because there are a lot of people going, what on earth is this about? Well,
shall I deal with the two Roys?
Yeah.
My uncle Roy Diggory wanted to be a pilot, and when the Second World War came around, he applied to join the Royal Air Force, but failed the pilot medical because he was colourblind. As a result of that, he became an air traffic controller and worked in the Middle East through most of the Second World War. And then in 1947, when he was finishing his tour of duty and was about to be demobbed, he was handing over to his replacement, and the aeroplane that they were flying in to go around to all the various airports that he was responsible for crashed into a hillside. And he actually survived the crash and managed to crawl to a village nearby and died in the hospital there. And he was a very, very brave man. To get that far, having survived an air accident, was quite an achievement. So
that's quite sad, though. That's quite a sad story, isn't it?
It is very sad. His younger sister named her son after her brother. And that's the second Roy, who became an Air Force pilot in Rhodesia, as it was then, Zimbabwe today.
Yeah.
And he was killed on a training exercise flying a de Havilland Vampire. So that was the second Roy.
Yes.
But when I was 16, the reason I got into flying was I had the chance to fly out to stay with my aunt in Rhodesia, Zimbabwe. So for the first time, I flew on my own at 16. And I'll be honest with you, I was really quite nervous about the idea of flying, particularly doing it on my own at that age.
Yeah.
The aeroplane flew from London to Paris and then down to Salisbury. By the time we'd landed in Paris, I was absolutely sold on the idea that being a pilot would be great. So when I got out to Rhodesia, my cousin was an airline pilot and my cousin was an Air Force pilot and his sister was married to an airline pilot. Now, I'd always thought air pilots were superhuman beings, and I met these two completely normal people who flew aeroplanes.
Yeah.
And Roy was particularly encouraging that I should go for it. So that's the reason I became a pilot. So Roy, the second Roy, my cousin, was very influential in me becoming a pilot. He gave me the confidence to apply, and I then applied, was lucky to be trained by the national carrier, and then had a career spanning, say, 45 years, flying for 7 different airlines, flying 14 different types.
Wow. Okay. So did it live up to what you hoped it would be once you were hooked on the idea?
Oh, absolutely. Once I started flying, I loved it.
Yeah.
And
so what was the best bit about it for you?
So part of it was the chance to travel, see the world. The other side, it was actually flying the airplane. The skills involved in takeoff, landing, dealing with emergencies, dealing with problems on the airplane. And then I became a training captain and a training standards captain. So got involved in training pilots and training trainers. And that was very rewarding as well.
Yeah, I bet. So just thinking about it, so I'm going to come back to you in a moment, Roy. Don't worry, I haven't forgotten about you. So for you, John, did you actually start flying? What was the first aircraft type you were rated for?
The very first airplane I ever flew was a Piper Cherokee.
Okay, yeah.
I did something called a junior wings course, which the Hearts Education Authority ran back in the mid-70s. I applied to that and was successful. It gave you 10 hours of flying at half price.
Nice.
My father very kindly coughed up the £50, which is what half price 10 hours cost in 1973. And I went solo. So the first aeroplane I ever went solo in was Golf Alpha Tango Tango Mike. I remember it to this day. It was a Piper Cherokee at Elstree in Hertfordshire.
Nice. And then what about when you became qualified as, you got your commercial pilot's license? What was the first aircraft you're on then?
When I got my first license, there were no jobs in the UK, and I ended up going abroad. I went to Jordan, and I became a commercial flying instructor at the Royal Jordanian Air Academy.
Right.
And I stayed there for about 2 years, and then I went down to Abu Dhabi, and I continued to fly light aeroplanes. And I did that until about 1986. So the first commercial jet, which I think is probably what you're interested in, was a Boeing 737.
Okay.
And I flew that for one of the, I flew it for Monarch Airlines, who are now around.
Oh, yeah. I love Monarch. Great airline for airline. Yeah. Interesting. And 737 is like the workhorse, isn't it? It's like, it's such a fantastic aircraft, it's still around. Lots of different versions of it now, but it's a real solid beast, that one.
Yeah, it's very different from the 737 I flew. I flew the very first one. So, well, not quite the first one, but one of the first ones, the 737-200.
Right.
Analog instrumentation.
Yeah.
Basic flying. A perfect way to learn how to fly a commercial jet.
Okay, thanks, John. So let's go over to Roy for a bit then, and I'm interested in this sort of the fear of flying thing, and particularly when you've had such great exposure to flying, and you've got an expert at home. How did that all happen then?
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, I think from my childhood flying, I never thought I wanted to be a pilot. I loved it. And then it was about, I can remember the exact day, it was 1997, 1st September. And it was the, funny of the day Princess Di, died, and she passed away. And I was in Jordan, funnily enough. And I was left on a later flight because we couldn't get enough seats. And I'd had no sleep. As I got on the plane, my uncle said to me, "Princess Di is dead. See you later." And then get on the plane. And I was like, what a weird day. Everything was very strange, and obviously heightened anxiety, all very odd, very surreal, had no sleep. It was flew on a A320 back to London. And as we were coming to Heathrow, we had just quite a rough approach. Plane swung left and right. Later on, Dad told me it was wake turbulence, but I didn't know what that was. But we were swinging around a bit, and you can see everyone else in the plane was, what's going on? And I'd never even thought it about before, but suddenly I was just petrified. I was like, oh my God, really scared. And then it was like a door had opened, and that was it. And then suddenly the next time I went on a plane, I was really nervous, and the build up to the flight even. I was quite nervous, and I was like, what is this? I was always fine flying. Why am I suddenly not fine flying? And then I realized that something had triggered, within me. And then I started to really struggle with it. I think to the point, sort of a few years later, I just turned around to my then girlfriend, soon wife, and said, I've had enough. I don't want to do this anymore. And sort of really took a couple of years off flying, really, and just said, I can't even go on a plane. I was supposed to fly for work and all that sort of stuff. And so really struggled.
Did he know by then?
No, well, this is the thing. I didn't talk to him about it. And that was what was really interesting. So it was only a few years later I started to open up about it. So I used to just suffer in silence. And that's what I realized was a huge mistake. So I wouldn't talk to the cabin crew. I wouldn't talk to my father who knew all about this. I'd go on flights with Dad, sometimes with the family, and I'd just suffer in absolute silence. And I just didn't talk about it. And it was only
Be a great actor. That you
Kate the mask.
exactly. This is great, isn't it?
Gripping the seat, and you're right. Yeah, absolutely fine.
Tired.
Yeah, exactly. And so that happened, and then about sort of 15 years ago, I started to talk to Dad about it, and I started to ask him questions, and I started to open up a little bit about it, and that's where the genesis for putting this book together came, because there's lots of pilots written books, people with fear of flying, but we thought this idea of father son, fear of flying, the family history.
Yes.
And so as the fear deepened, I felt like I was battling with that family history. I was like, oh my God, is this my fate? Am I going to just end up the same as the other Roys? So yeah, it ended up being quite tricky for a number of years.
How did you feel, John, when you heard that? I mean, the first time you kind of sussed out what was going on, what was that like for you?
It was a bit of a shock, to be absolutely honest. I mean, I can remember Roy wanting to be an airline pilot, and we had an inkling that he might have some sort of issue with colour blindness, like his great uncle. And when he was 17, I took him to have a CA medical to find out if it was worth trying to pursue an airline career. And unfortunately, he found out that he was colourblind. And it never crossed my mind that he would be anything but happy with flying, because obviously back then he was. And I knew he'd gone through some panic attacks while he was away at college, so I was aware of that side of things. But I hadn't realised how it impacted him when it came to flying.
Yes. And that must have been quite a shocker, particularly, and a brave thing to do for you as well, Roy, to sort of admit, something that your dad loved and made you advocate for is, something that isn't good for you.
Yeah.
Did it spill into other areas as well? Because sometimes it can start with fear of flying and then go to other forms of transport, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely just generally panic attacks. I used to suffer that, particularly when I was younger. Bit of claustrophobia as well. Never really noticed it on buses or cars or anything like that, which are generally fine. But certainly with particularly planes where you don't have any control and you're just sat there. So yeah, I think there was a general anxiety part, but it just seemed to peak with flying as well. And I managed to broadly handle my panic attacks over time. But the thing I noticed with flying, like even today, it doesn't fully go away. It's not like I get on it. I don't think you'd be being genuine if you said, oh, you can just get on a plane now and it's all fine. But by doing lots of work and breaking things down with my dad, and what we do in the book is we have what we call the panic and the fun charts, which sounds a bit weird, but as you go through the journey of flying, where are my peak moments of panic, and we compare it to where Dad most enjoys flying.
Interesting.
So there's charts throughout the book, and the book's broken down into the different facets of flying, leading to the flight, the airport, takeoff, turbulence, landing. So we break it down and we talk about everything from the pilot and a nervous flyer's view. And one of the big insights when we did that work is when I'm at my most nervous, that's when my dad was having the most enjoyment. So I'd be like building up to flight and takeoff and like really scared.
Yeah.
And my dad was actually quite bored up until the flight. But then when it gets to the takeoff, he's like, this is now fun. This is the good bit. The landing's the fun bit. Oh, we've got a bit of turbulence. Oh, this is quite interesting. Right. I've got something to do here. So we realized your body can be having a similar reaction, cortisol, excitement, whatever. But the way I interpret it is totally different to my dad. And so we were able to put that side by side. And it made me start to realize like there's different ways of interpreting flying, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I love that. You literally the way you've described it, because I was going to come on to that here, what was the process. But that's a really interesting way to look at it, to see what is actually going on, and you're both in the same situation, but your perception is very different depending on what you think about that. And, which is obviously quite a core thing. The interesting thing for you, Roy, is that you had quite a few of the building blocks already there for fear of flying. They say fears of flying, which, as you know, is like an umbrella term for lots of different things, including panic attacks and claustrophobia, etc. So you had not being in control. So you had some of those elements already. So yeah, interesting. Oh, very gutsy of you to admit to it as well. I think that was brilliant. So tell us about the process then. What sort of stuff you did to help each other? Because it sounds like it's been a mutual thing, actually.
Yeah, I mean, it started with I guess it started with just me asking questions of Dad and him, just, so how does this work and what's this and what's
so how far back? Just to give us a bit of the timeline. How long
it's been 15 years, probably 15 years. So we're suffering before that, but then started to sort of work on it together, and particularly the recent years we really started working on it together. And so what we did is we've sort of beefed each part out, and we got to write it more and more and talk about our perspectives for each part. So starting with booking and planning for the flight, to getting up on the day, to driving to the airport, to getting to the airport. And what we realized, half the book is not about flying. Half the book is about the anticipation of flying. So it's actually about the build up to it. And we started to build that out. And then we came up with this idea of the panic and the fun chart. And we said, well, let's actually chart what we're feeling and what's happening. And what we realized is, the tone of what we say is totally different. Mine's quite panicky, quite, oh my God, what's going to happen? And Dad's is almost factual. It's just, well, actually what you'll find is it's A and B and C. And what we did is we then tested it with nervous flyers. So we sent it out to nervous flyers and we sort of said, have a read of this. What do you think? Is it weird? Does it kind of make sense? And the feedback we got on it was, people said that actually it was quite nice because it's like a conversation about fear of flying, and it's quite real. So it's not someone saying I've got all the answers, or a pilot saying here's the 10 things you need to do. It's actually just more vulnerable than that. It's actually just talking through what's challenging about it.
So where do you find these nervous flyers then? I'm just like, I know where to find them, but where do you find them?
But it's amazing. I saw one stat that said 25% of people in the US have some form of aerophobia and one or the other. So when I was talking to people about writing this book, so many of friends and family would go, oh my God, I am so, or they'd know someone, and so we just we tested it with psychologists, we tested it with pilots, people we knew, and we just said, like, is this right? The pilots were like, have you technically got everything right? The psychologists were like, don't say that. And then the nervous flyers, to your point, Paul, was what will work. And I had to be careful because I was very explicit about how I experienced flying. And you don't want to make people scared, but you kind of want to be real about it. It's like, this is the irrational stuff that goes through your head as you're about to take off or you go through turbulence. So yeah, we were trying to do both. But I don't, Dad, anything you want to share on it?
And say the interesting thing I find, having done it all now, reading through the book, is the two completely different styles. You've got the completely emotional from Roy's side of the book, and the logical, factual from my side of the book, which I suppose is a juxtaposition between the flyer and the passenger and the pilot. And you hope in the real world they are that way round.
Well, obviously that'd be nice. Oh, got another way of another one. I find it fascinating. I think it's a really interesting idea, and I haven't heard anybody else that's done it like this, where you've got this father-son combo, and that's sort of being able to put the two of you together and literally go, this is what's happening for me. And the difference. I find that really interesting. He's bored, but I'm not. And then I'm panicking. He's excited. I just think that. Quite a helpful way to approach it, isn't it?
That correlation is most marked when we do the chapter on takeoff and the chapter on landing. And we chose to call it the fun bit for the pilots. It's where they're most engaged, enjoying, but we couldn't come up with a short, pithy word to cover it. And fun was as close as we could get. But I don't think a nervous flyer would find coming into land a fun thing. But for the pilots, that's the bit they've been training for. That's the bit of the flight they enjoy the most, probably, takeoff and landing. But the two graphs are literally like sine curves and a match almost exactly, with my enjoyment increasing and then dying, and Roy's panic increasing and then dying. And it's amazing. And that only came about at the end of the book. We never had set out. We didn't think, oh, this will probably work. It was something we discovered when we started writing it.
Okay, so let's sort of talk about a little bit. So your journey then, one pun, 15 years ago, you started asking more questions, and then you came out and said, actually, I don't like flying. And at what point was that in this 15-year journey? And the second question, follow up, is at what point did you start to nurse a decrease in symptoms or panic or whatever?
Yeah. So I think it was a gradual sharing over time, so it's quite hard. And when people read the book, they're quite astonished how open I am about the fear, because, and I've heard some of your podcasts, but people, they think the most rational things, when it's happening. So, I think over time I opened up more. And the thing I'll never remember is my mum, dad's wife, like reading the book, and she was horrified. She was like, I can't believe you went through all this. Wow. You didn't tell me, you didn't talk about it. And it was only through writing the book, we probably opened up more and more and sort of said, oh, here's what's going on. So it was only when we really finished, I felt like I fully got it out. So I'd say that's thing number one, was it was over time, just sharing more and more. Pretty beginning, I was like, Dad, sometimes I just find flying a bit uncomfortable. Can you just answer these questions for me? But like, not really revealing like how scared I was about it. Because, I didn't want to let him down. He's like, flying's amazing. What do you mean? What do you mean it's not good? So it was quite hard at first to sort of open up about that. And actually I did my own research. You'll know this, Paul, like about any of that stuff. Talking about it is the starting point. You actually start to say something. And then, sorry, what was your second question, Paul?
The second question was, when did you start to notice a decrease in symptoms?
Yeah, I mean, I think I started to apply some of the strategies. So as I talked to Dad, I'd figure out where my peak moments were, like peak takeoff, hate bumpy turbulence, particularly like landing. So
whoa. Is that hate or hated?
Hated. Yeah. That's
a just more check,
Yeah. Slightly disliked now, I would say.
Okay.
Really didn't like.
John's happy with that.
Yeah, exactly. So I've started to figure out where my peaks were, and learning I could relax around outside of those peaks. So not just being in a constant state of like, I'm going to die, just actually calm yourself for those bits. I used to use the seatbelt sign. If that's off, chill. Why panic when the seatbelt sign's off? There's no point, right? And understanding more about what's going on in the cockpit with Dad helped me think about what's going on with the pilot. And I used to be, why are they not talking? But he'd tell me why they're not talking a bit. Okay, now I know why they're not talking. So I can just chill with that. It's absolutely fine. We figured out pilots always do an announcement 14, 20 minutes before landing. Didn't know that. So I was like, okay, like
Say that again, sorry, Roy.
Pilots always do announcements about 40 and 20 minutes before landing. So just learning things like that, you're like, okay, they'll talk here, then there's nothing, then they'll talk here. It's fine. There's nothing to worry about. And then the other thing, I'll just share this, because it's in the book. At one point, again, probably 10, 15 years ago, I went through a particularly scary flight. So we were landing into Newark. I lived in New York for a bit, and we were landing into Newark, New Jersey. And there was a storm, and part of Manhattan lost its power. And we were one of those old 757s, so they're quite old at the time. And we were going to land in Newark, and there was wind shear. So just as the plane was about to land, pilot overshot, said, no, we're going to go back up into the air. Very, very bumpy. It's one of those, they warn you about an hour out. They say, yeah, it's going to be a bumpy landing. So you're like, oh, this is quite unusual.
Yeah.
And we then went back up into the air, and the pilot came on. I was sat near the front of the plane. The pilot came on and said, we're going to run out of fuel. We're going to have to divert. So again, I was like, okay.
Something you want to hear, really, is it? No.
Yeah, it was quite, and I had a pilot positioning behind me, and I said, "Is this normal?" No, not really. In a very calm voice. It's very matter of fact. I was like, I don't think that makes me feel better, but okay. No. So we had to divert, as it's Stewart Air Force Base, about 200 miles north of New York, and we had to land there in a storm, and it was calm up there. We got down, and I'll never forget the pilot opened the door because we couldn't get off the plane because we were in this Air Force Base. And he walked out and he just went, poof, like that. And my boss, who was with me because it was on a business flight, said to him, was that okay? And he said to us, that is about as tough as it gets. We had wind shear, we had to pull up, we were running low on fuel, we had to divert, but we were never in danger. We were never actually, there was no problem. And I remember I came back and talked to Dad about it, and he was like, yeah, the planes overshoot all the time, they have wind shear all the time, they divert all the time. That just happens. You can imagine if that appeared on Daily Mail or something, you'd be like, plane 1,000 foot and this. So it's weirdly, I don't know what you might have a better way of terming it, Paul, but it was that I started to feel better after that, because I went through that and I realized, I went, well, that's about almost as bad as it gets. And I started to employ more of my strategies after that. And I sort of I knew now, I'm like, even within that, because sometimes I come back and get to Dad, oh, you won't believe this flight I went on. We swerved this, we did this. And he'd be sat there going like, it's normal. Absolutely fine. There's nothing weird.
You're not the best audience for that sort of story, John, to be honest.
But the really interesting about that particular story is that when they were coming in the wind shear and they had to do the go around, that is probably the most scariest bit for the passenger, because suddenly you get all this rush of engines, you have G-forces that they rotate, you climb away, and actually that is the safest thing they could be doing.
Yes.
So the fact that the passengers are all worried, actually, if he didn't do that, they'd be a lot more worried. In fact, they would be in deep trouble. And he has done exactly the right thing, but it doesn't seem like it unless you know. To the point now where Roy now realizes that if they don't continue the landing, they go around, that's a good thing. Yeah. You want to worry about if they hadn't done it. Yeah. That's, if you like, the logical bit of the pilot. It's the right thing to do. Might not feel nice, but it's safe.
Yeah.
This doesn't feel like it at the back.
I think for Roy, he would have been like a lot of people, when something happens and it's outside of kind of your expectation, and then you are looking for micro signals around stuff to confirm or otherwise what's actually going on. And so people will say, everybody screamed, and say, well, they probably didn't, but that's what you saw. Then the pilot was like, oh, that was a close one. Or, because I flew with American Airlines recently. It was an American airline, not American Airlines, an American. But this pilot said, yeah, we've decided to switch aircraft. The other one wasn't really that good, so we think this one will be a bit better. And I was thinking, I thought it was quite funny, but I was thinking you probably just created a bunch of customers here. And, I think so someone who's nervous will hear that very different to somebody who's, like.
Exactly. And that was the thing. I'd come back ready to regale my dad of these stories, and he just normalized them all. He'd be like, no, that happens every day. Like, I once went to two things I was going to say. When I did that go around, one of the things I did to myself, I kept saying 11 million to 1, 11 million to 1, 11 million to 1, 11 million to 1 out loud to myself, because I was like, that's kind of the chances of the plane being in trouble. And I just literally said it to myself as the plane was routing back up into the storm. And that's like, 11 million to 1, 11 million to 1. It's just like, come on. This doesn't happen. And it was fine. And I remember even I was...
Can I just ask you, have you managed to get rid of the chanting now, or is that still a thing?
Sometimes, yes, definitely. I don't need to say anything out loud. No, definitely not. So some more extreme things you do, stop those.
But in that moment, you were kind of retraining yourself, weren't you?
Yeah.
And Gary, I interrupt you. Carry on.
No, just thinking about the logical things that I'd learned from Dad. And then, even I remember we went out to Indonesia, and I flew with one of the Indonesian airlines. And even there, I'd come back and be like, God, I think we flew through a typhoon, and Dad would be like, you definitely didn't fly through a typhoon. Like, definitely, you probably had thunderstorms about 100 miles to the east or something and thought you were flying through. So every time I dramatized it, Dad would normalize it.
Yeah.
And over time, I think I started to do that. And then the other big thing is knowing where your peak moments are. And that's one thing in the book. I guess it's a behavioral therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy type approach. But, what are your peak moments? Where do you panic? What do you do? And then also, where can you find some enjoyment in flying? So my dad would sometimes tell me some things about, oh, I really love that. And I'd be like, love what? And so the next time I'm flying, I'd be like, okay, well, let's give this a try. Like, he loves this. Like, and I just try and adopt that mindset and go like, oh, it's quite cool when you're like taking off, or so those sorts of things.
And also another thing, I mean, I remember Roy asking me about turbulence. And I said, pilots hate turbulence. The last thing they will do is deliberately fly where it is turbulent. So you can be absolutely sure that if it is bumpy, the pilot will be doing everything he can to get out of the bumps as quickly as he can. We don't sit there thinking, this is great. We're sitting thinking, this is really uncomfortable. Let's see if we can change the level. Let's see if we can take a different routing. And hopefully, if people realize that actually we are trying to do the best for you at all times, and there are things we can do, that'll help people to feel a little bit less nervous about things like turbulence.
Yes. Because and I think the important point that people sometimes forget is that I think the pilots are not worried about the turbulence; they're just annoyed by it, like everybody else is. Like, you're doing it for comfort, not for safety, and so that those sort of messages can never be said enough. So you just saying that again, John, is super helpful. Because people, they will be listening into this. So, without giving the shop away, would you perhaps share some sort of a couple of strategies that people could think about, and then obviously that will encourage them to then go and get your book as well, so they can learn even more about it. But just maybe a couple of things, because you said you had some certain things that you use, and some, I think you called them tools or strategies. I can't remember what you called them, Roy, but things that you've learned either from your dad or that you've worked out yourself. That just a bit of a flavor.
So I guess without sort of, it sound like rocket science, like it's not. I think one of the big things was figuring out, when you're two things. One, when you're at your peak moment of panic, I think two key strategies, however you did it, that I would do. One is focus on something else. So whether that's, your TV, your magazine, your routine, whatever it is, find something else. And I would make sure, because I know this is a peak moment of panic coming, and the more granular you can get about it. So I know I'm fine taking a taxi to the runway. I'm fine as we accelerate. I hate that moment 1,000 feet up. I used to hate that moment when the gear goes and suddenly the plane engines die down a little bit, and you have, because of noise abatement procedures or something like that. And that always gets me. So I always just found, I know that's where it's coming. I used to do things like religiously try and read something, focus on something, do something, and not be focusing on what's going on with the plane. So just really hammering down in granular detail, where are those peak moments? And then the other thing was just talking to people more. So looking for support networks through those particular moments as well. Talk about different types, technical support, emotional support, people like yourself, Paul, who know about it, people you're with, family, whoever you can, just actually getting those different types of support. So I think that's one of the key things. We talk about writing your flying story, and everyone has their own flying story. So why do you fly? Why do you want to do it? A lot of people haven't always thought through that. And then what's your story of a flight? And writing that down, these moments, what works, and then coming back and constantly rewriting it. So what I would have done 5 years ago, I won't do now, because I don't need to. But I still have the odd thing I will employ now that's probably a lot more subtle.
Okay, thank you. And can perhaps go to you, John, with your pilot hat on. What do you think people would get from the book who are nervous flyers that's going to kind of make them go, okay, I trust these. I trust these two.
Hopefully, the sort of questions Roy asked me, are not very different from the questions a lot of people I meet, at parties or in pubs. Oh, you're a pilot. Why does such and such happen?
Yes.
And actually, I think what was really interesting for me was when we came to actually write the book, a lot of what we're doing was all stuff that I had discussed with Roy in the past and answered. And the biggest problem was putting it in a language that the passenger will understand. Why does the noise change at 1,000 feet? Well, we're on a SID. It's the noise abatement departure. At this point, the throttle's. That's not what happens. At that point in the departure, the pilots had to throttle back to make sure there's less noise for the people on the ground.
Yeah.
So trying to put it in simple terms that anybody can understand. And hopefully by going through the flight stage by stage, people can then look at that and say, I'm particularly nervous on takeoff. They can then read the bit on takeoff. And then at the end of the takeoff chapter is a précis of, if you like, the learning points and the bits that I've found that people ask me a lot of questions about the quick, short, pithy answers to that. But if you want more detail, it's in the chapter itself.
I think what we tried to do as well is we broke into 3 areas. So where can you focus? What can you do? And what do you need to remember? And just for each part of the flight. And I think that was the key thing. I guess it's just hard-won experience, 40 years of flying, over 20 years of getting super nervous on a plane, and just trying to combine that together and saying, here's, and it's quite a short book, it's not, so you see some fear of flying books, they're like 600 pages long, it's a nice short book.
Yeah.
It's something people can just pick up, have a little read and think before the plane and go where they need to go.
I was going to ask you that actually, because in your the vision for the book itself, was it a kind of a prep tool, or was it something that you saw people would take on the flight and then what's it?
Yeah, well that's again, we tested it with a few nervous flyers when we were doing it, and that was the big feedback we got back. They really liked the idea of the small short summaries, the charts, and just diving into what's going on for them right now. So you might read the first part and the end part just to get the idea of the book, but the end bit is just to come back and find something that will just work for you, just a thing to remember. It's like you said, Paul, you can never say it too many times, and okay, I'm feeling a bit bad about this turbulence here. I talk about 3 types of turbulence, it's a sort of gold, silver, bronze, if you like. How do you think about those? What happens? How do you deal with those different types of turbulence? So it's just something quick and easy and to use in the moment is the idea.
I like it. It sounds like you've really put a lot of thought into the way it hangs together, and there's a nice sort of logic and flow to the way that someone might access that. So it does sound like a really good read. So I really recommend anybody watching or listening to this to go and get a copy of it. So name check it again, Roy Diggory, hold it up.
Yes, I'll hang on, you might want to just pause a sec because I'll take my blur off if I can, because for some reason I've got blur. Oh no, I haven't now. That's okay. Can you still see me? There is the book, Feel the Fear and Fly Anyway. Hopefully that's kind of working there.
So what does what's the subtitle say?
It's Father and Son Guide to Flying Without Fear.
Oh, very nice.
John and Roy Diggory. So there's a nice little photo that's on the back. There you go. So there's a website, this podcast. There's a little book there.
You must be super proud. I mean, that's such a thing, such a lovely thing to do as a father and son as well. To be able to produce something like that that's intended to genuinely help people, and the fact that it has helped you, I think that's remarkable. So I'm going to ask John now. So John said he would ask me if I've ever been scared on a flight, and I say, well, I do sometimes ask pilots this. I sometimes ask. There's 2 sort of questions I tend to say. It's like, why should people trust pilots? Right? Why is commercial aviation so safe? And then sometimes I might ask if the guest is up for it. Have you actually ever been nervous yourself about any part of the flying experience? And so you can ignore me, you can answer those, but I'd love, if you're okay with that, John, to have a stab at a couple of those.
Okay, yep. So which one do you want? Have I ever been scared on a flight?
Yeah, let's do that one.
Okay. In a commercial airliner, never. But in a little 18-seater Banderanti, I had flown into Brussels. The weather was foul. It was a single crew operation, so I was the only pilot. We'd gone around because we couldn't get into land, and we were diverting to Ostend. And as we were flying en route to Ostend, out of the blue, smoke started pouring out of the overhead panel.
Fantastic.
The only thing I can think of that will make me scared is fire in an aeroplane.
Yeah.
And that's why I was scared. But
Mm.
what it did was trigger me to carry out the appropriate quick reference handbook drill, which I did from memory, which was the drill on that aeroplane.
Yeah.
And luckily, the smoke all disappeared after a while. I was then able to then get out the actual reference handbook itself and go through it, found the system that was causing the problem, isolated that, and then went on for a normal landing at Ostend. But when that smoke poured into the flight deck, I have to admit, I was scared.
Yeah.
I knew what to do,
Yes.
but in the back of my mind is, what happens if it keeps going?
Yes.
I was 15 minutes away from landing. Was I going to use a fire extinguisher? How was I going to see through the smoke to land? I think anybody in that situation would have.
Yes, I think you're right. I think you're right.
But that is the one and only time. I've spoken to others who've about this, and I think you'll find with most pilots, the only thing that really does scare them is a fire on board, because it's out with your control, and normally you can't see the source.
Yes.
And,
Which is where I guess the cabin crew come in, but on that aircraft particular type, I don't know if you had any crew on there.
We had one crew member down the back, but that was it. Yeah. So yes. So to answer your question truthfully, that is the only time I've been scared on an airplane.
Okay, that's a good answer, isn't it? Yeah, well, that passes muster. Thank you. So between the two of you, then, why? Because there's been stuff. I'm not going to reference the obvious that's happened recently, but every now and then there's an incident or something. It's thankfully very, very rare. But for people who maybe lost a little bit of faith, what would you say is your collective message to those who are thinking about, I'm not so sure about this commercial aviation, Mark? What would you say to reassure them?
You mean as a passenger or pilot, or just going?
I don't mind. You just collect your collective wisdom for wherever it comes.
Just thinking.
Right.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's good. I mean, I have been thinking about that recently, obviously, because, without so referencing a couple of things being on the news. I still think, you need to take a step back and see the bigger picture of just how safe flying just still remains. And the news cycles and many of the tabloids are built to really ingrain that sense of fear. The thing Dad and I hate is that plane drops 1,000 foot in midair, because we're like, they don't. Why are they writing that? Stop it. Like, it's not true. And so, and news channels, CNN, whatever, are designed to just loop these things. You see the plane coming out of a building again and again for 5 days in a row. So it feels way more common than it is. And it's not common. It's not common. It's highly, highly, highly unusual. And if you take a step back and look at the stats, I'd call you know better than me. I don't think they've really changed. It is as safe as it's ever been. And you just have a couple of high sort of awareness of just these big incidents. But for someone like myself, who could have got lost in a fog of like, everyone who has my name dies in plane crashes, this is my destiny and all that, and I can get over a fear of flying. I think anyone can, and I believe, that's just what I'm not saying it's easy at all, but I think we don't have to lose faith in it, because it's by far the safest form of flying. All the statistics, safest form of travel, all the statistics back that up. And what I say in the book, it's a small moment of time for a world of opportunity. Flying opens up everything to you. And so I just can't see how we wouldn't want still to do it. And I had a love-hate relationship with it. I love flying, and I used to hate the way it made me feel. Yeah. And so I still think it's the greatest way to get around.
Nice. Anything you'd like to add to that, John?
I agree with all that Roy has said. I mean, from the the pilot's point of view. As a form of transport, the people doing the operating are probably the highest trained of any transport system. They're probably the most checked as well. Pilots go through at least 6 checks, sometimes more, a year. But probably the thing that makes it so safe is the the culture for reporting of an accident.
Yeah.
Yes, the culture of if something goes wrong, it is investigated and people look into why it went wrong, not to apportion blame, to find out what happened so that it doesn't happen again. And that has led to a huge improvement in safety.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that the recent accident that happened in India, there are loads of speculation going on, but they will not release the report until they've seen the 2 black boxes. They know exactly what went wrong, and then they will find out why it happened, and then things will be put in place to make sure that it doesn't happen again. Yeah. And there's very few industries that have a safety culture quite like that.
Yeah, I totally agree. The thing I've struggled with, there's 2 things actually. One is the media representation, the way they jump on it and the stuff that they say makes me shout at the TV. And the second thing is intelligent people that I've met, or even in the family circle, will say when something's happened, I heard that airline's not very good. And you think, no, there was a bit of turbulence. I don't think there was anything to do with the air. But these people just say things, regurgitate nonsense. And I have to then I'm in that really tricky position. You think, well, that's crap. But do I say that to you now at this family meal? Or do I sort of sit on it and smile? It's a really tricky one because there's so much nonsense that gets put into people's minds. And it's lovely to hear your version of it today.
So there's one thing you said earlier, Paul, that just right at the beginning of the podcast, if I may quickly, that struck me, because, people won't, bringing the horse to water, they won't come until they're ready, and so we could all espouse about flight safety and everything else, but people believe what they want to believe. But as in the story with my dad, when I was ready, I could come and talk about it. And I think that's the thing, when you know a lot, when people are ready, they'll come and talk to you about it, and you just have to wait, and eventually they'll realize. And I think that's been one of my big learnings from this book is when you're ready, you'll engage with it.
Well, I love the fact that you've been able to help each other with this, and it's been a great project. But I'm really impressed that that for you, Roy, you were able to hear it, and for John, you were able to find a way that you could tell your son, because I'm a parent, and sometimes it's quite hard to think, how can I say this to somebody that's going to they're going to take it on board, and being able to help somebody who's a family member that's remarkable. I think that's really impressive, and so I think that's the lovely sentiment behind this book, and I really hope it does well for you. I don't know how long it's been out, but let's promote the hell out of it. We'll do a little plug in all our little places. And I'm so grateful for you giving your time up today and sharing your story. It's been brilliant.
Thank you, Paul. Really appreciate you having us on. Thank you.
Thank you all.